Welcome to the XY Advisor Podcast, a global community of financial advisors sharing and learning with one another to drive the positive evolution of financial advice. To get involved, go to xyadvisor.com or simply download the XY Advisor app. This podcast series is proudly brought to you by Russell Investments. With more than 80 years of experience, Russell Investments is a global investment solution partner dedicated to helping investors reach their long-term goals. Russell Investments specialize in multi-asset solutions that combine asset allocation, capital markets insights, factor exposure, manager research, and portfolio implementation. Welcome back to the XY Advisor Podcast. We are in our second episode of our five-part series on ESG, focused investing. Today we're talking about the actual need. Is there an actual need for ESG? What is it, and what is it from all angles? And today, of course, I'm joined by Philip Moffat. Welcome, Philip.
G'day, Fraser.
Thank you for joining us. Now let's dive straight into this topic. Tell us about this ESG thing, and why is there a need for it?
Well, if you remember from our last episode, we talked about environmental, social and governance as being really a shorthand way to measure some of the components of sustainability. And sustainability means creating businesses or assets that have long and productive lives, not just financial lives, but also lives that contribute positively to the communities in our environment. I think that the core issue is the idea that sustainable businesses trade at a higher valuation or sustainable assets trade at a higher valuation than unsustainable ones. If you think something's going to last for 100 years, you're prepared to pay a higher multiple of earnings on it than if you think it's going to last for 10. That's it. That's the guts of it. And so investors forever have been trying to find ways to figure out whether the assets they're investing in are sustainable or not. ESG is just a way of codifying that process and saying, here are some of the measures you might want to look at, and here are some of the measures that the assets and the businesses could produce that help you understand whether they're sustainable or not. And so is it necessary? Yes, it's necessary to try and make good investment decisions. Yes, it's necessary from the assets or the company's perspective to try and attract capital at an attractive valuation. And if it's necessary from both sides of the transactions, it's necessary for the market.
Now, if we go back to both sides of this transaction, you mentioned obviously sustainable, amazing concept for investors. For consumers, are they looking at sustainability, or are they looking at more sort of their own passions, beliefs, emotions at the time, what they've heard, what their beliefs are?
Oh, look, I think that potentially there's some confusion in the space, right? So people start talking about ESG or sustainability or impact or being socially aware or triple bottom line, all these kind of things. And it can be conflated between trying to generate an optimal economic outcome, however you define optimal economic outcome, but define more broadly than financial outcome. Right? So reduce pressures on the environment, better social outcomes and so on, some sort of function that gets optimized.
Yep.
Compared to individuals or groups who may have very specific social or environmental beliefs. And those social environmental beliefs may line up with the optimal business structure or asset structure, and they may not. I might really believe that, pick something, that you shouldn't take a fish out of the ocean. And genuinely believe that. And so I'm going to invest in assets that only work to stop any fishing in the ocean. Others might think that, there's scope for some fishing, but it needs to be controlled and regulated. You need to do other stuff. And so dividing those two things, I think, are really important. And there will be a group of providers of assets or portfolios who adhere to very strict controls around very specific constraints. And they'll be appropriate for that small group of investors who have kind of a really, really strong belief about an individual topic. ESG, I think, is a much broader idea for the investment market.
So one of the things that, as you mentioned sort of in the first episode, and we sort of touched on it, the idea of trading at a higher multiple, the financial logic that came with the idea of investing in ESG funds. And as you mentioned, consumers are at that space where they still sort of may believe that the financial logic doesn't stack up, or that it's an emotional decision. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think if they genuinely believe that the finances don't stack up, they shouldn't invest. It's the manager of the asset or the advisor who's working with the client who needs to be able to make the case and challenge that set of beliefs. If somebody believes something, it's all you can do is engage with the facts and try and persuade. But if you can't change the view, you can't change the view. I do think that increasingly we're going to see, you can see it in the marketplace now, that businesses with a lower carbon footprint trade at higher multiples to ones with a higher carbon footprint. And we get caught up in the politics, should there be a carbon tax? Shouldn't there be a carbon tax? Should there be a mining tax? Should we be charging electric vehicles less road tax than petrol-driven? All this kind of stuff. That's just politics and short-term tax and all that kind of stuff. You've got to put yourself in the long-term seat of an investor who says, look, we mightn't be charging a tax on carbon today, but we will. And we'll either do it directly or we'll do it indirectly, because the market will figure out what the implicit costs are. And so as a long-term investor looking at assets, forget about the short-term politics noise and all that rubbish. Try and look beyond to the ultimate necessary outcome.
Yep. I guess some of my thoughts around that is with the initial, where are we at on the journey of is ESG an emotional decision, or is it a financial decision, or is it both? Where are we on that journey? Like, I know you're sort of mentioning the multiples are higher, those sorts of things. Is the ESG investing space now come to or past any non-ESG investment space?
I think in parts of the market it has. So. Particularly, I think about big pools of capital in Europe, so pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, insurance companies and stuff. If you don't have a verifiable quality ESG filter on assets you bring to those organisations, you don't get through the gate. They're just not even looked at. And increasingly that's the case here for the super funds, and because it's what our members demand. And it will become increasingly the case in other parts of the investable universe too. And it's not just in the kind of the rich Western world. It's also the case with pools of capital in, for instance, emerging Asia, which insist on these sorts of measures being put in place.
Fantastic. Philip, thank you for coming on and chatting us about this particular topic. I look forward to catching you in the next episode where we tackle the 50 Shades of Green. Welcome back, Elizabeth.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming back. Now, today we're talking about all things to do with ESG, and is there an actual need? And we really wanted to dive into the concept of why is ESG a thing, and why is it relevant? What are your thoughts on that? ESG
is a thing which is used by fund managers and analysts to look at the risk of this investment. So ESG is a metric that's looking at how risky this investment is going to be from a financial point of view, and from a long-term point of view. It is not what investors and clients generally think of as ESG, which is, I'm going to buy this product or invest in it because it fits my value frame. And so a lot of things that are ESG, they mean two different things to the fund manager and the analyst versus the client. But ESG is also a convenient sort of set of measures by which one can start to think about what it is that a fund or a company is doing in terms of taking into account the environmental risk factors that might impact on its business longer term, and whether it's going to be a stayer in the system.
Yep. So from a client point of view, if you're talking to a client, they've come in, you mentioned there's sort of a different thing. They're coming at this from a passion or emotion point of view, as well as, this is the world that they have to live in and they're bringing their kids up in.
Yep.
And they want something, they want to make sure that their investments aren't creating damage or harm to start with. Is that the starting point?
Their starting point is, I have some money and I want to do the right thing with it, and I want to make sure that we can contribute to the planet being green, or a safer planet for our kids, or whatever. And I've heard about ESG, and then I will usually go through the explanation to them about what ESG actually is, and to figure out with that client what their value frame is, and talk to them about that ESG is one way of understanding things and it's limited. And then if they're also more interested in that, then I will sort of go through the metrics behind what ESG actually means, and how there's no particular set framework that measures everything except against a certain set of variables, and that there's a whole lot of interpretations and misinterpretations about these things.
Yep.
So it's setting a framework that says this is as much as we can know about anything that's ESG reliably, and you need to understand that this is an inexact science.
Yeah, it's fun. It's interesting, isn't it? Because there's the emotional decision-making factors inside a client's mind, and then there's the financial logic, and as you said before, the science logic involved. So a couple of different logical things involved. Do you think clients are making the decisions on emotion, or are they making decisions on the financial and scientific logic?
I think that it's a bit of both, and I think that people want to feel good about what they're doing. And what they think that they're doing with their finances is real, and it's not fraudulent in any way. And I mean that a fund manager or a company isn't lying about what it's doing. But people are also, I think that there's different behaviours that people have about investing money, and then where they have indirect control in a way of what happens to their money versus their decisions to spend on something that they have identified themselves to be ethical, like, clothing or recycling or whatever. And then some people actually want to donate money, and they've actually identified, a charity or a good cause or whatever that they're willing to support that fits in with their principles. So I think a lot of it is about locus of control, and investing is where they actually have the least amount of control.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So you, indirect control or some sort of control around how they feel about the outcomes, or the feeling good about the investment. Is that the main reason why you think there is a need for ESG investing funds?
From the client's point of view?
Yep.
I think that the need is there because people want to be doing the right thing for themselves. I don't think it's anything that people particularly talk about in their communities or groups. People are fairly private about their money, and the clients that I've recently done a client survey on things, and my clients never talk to their friends about money.
Yeah, that's really interesting too. Is that would they be more likely to talk to their friends about money if they were feeling good about the ESG part of their portfolio?
I think if they were feeling confident about it, they might. Yep.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, it's always been
Yeah, so feeling good is one thing, but actually feeling confident that, what your funds are actually doing is actually making a difference to whatever. Yep. Is different. Yeah. And I think that a lot of the things that people do to make themselves feel good about these things is join sort of various activist groups or where they can actually visually have some sort of impact if they go to sort of shareholders meetings or whatever, where they know that their effort has made some sort of impact. It's more demonstrable than investing, which is has longer term outcomes anyway.
Yep. And what about returns? Is that often a big part of the equation? Obviously, sometimes with the returns on investment.
I think that people's returns are an issue, but only if they're going to be not supporting a sort of future lifestyle that they're wanting. I don't think that people necessarily want to be able to make stellar returns, and I usually tell people that I can't guarantee any returns that anyone's going to make anyway. I think that what they're wanting is that there's some level of comfort with the returns that they can make, and the evidence is in that responsible, whatever that word means, responsible investing is equivalent in terms of its returns or better than the returns of your average international or local fund.
Do you think that people think that the returns will be less because it is an ESG?
I think that they used to, but I don't think they do anymore.
Yeah, okay. So times have changed, tides turned.
I think time to change, time to turn, and I think that one of the influencing factors of that is the governance part of the ESG is really important, and that companies that manage what they're doing, that look after their staff, and that are actually taking the effects of, climate change or, energy issues into account in terms of their business planning do better longer term. So it's good company practice.
Fantastic. Thank you, Elizabeth, for joining us in this episode. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode when we tackle the 50 Shades of Green. Welcome back to this episode, Paul Garner.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us. Now, in this episode, of course, we're talking about the is there a need for ESG? Why is ESG a thing? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think people realised that they've got this big lump of money sitting in usually superannuation that may be funding things that they don't really feel good about. And that's been a gradual realisation over time. There's been advisors doing this a lot longer than me. So there was a niche of people who all generally had this issue, but that is growing over time as people realise that how can they influence what's happening in the world. And for me, as I have been and still am a social activist in terms of trying to influence the political process, and then I thought, personally, there's another way to do this, and that's through the flow of money. Money talks, BS walks. So if you can make the money talk, then that's a way of influencing outside of the political system how things are going in our world. So that was a big motivation for me to specialise in that area when setting up my own practice. I thought, if I could get enough people together to start that influence or spread that influence, then that could be powerful. And so that was my motivation.
It's really interesting, isn't it? Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it, that everyone's sort of got their story, but the two great, amazing things that you sort of mentioned on there, the fact that your own, the social activism or the idea of you trying to make a better world for yourself and your family and your friends and those people around you, community, and then also the realization that the influence large amounts of money can have on businesses and investment and shareholdings and the difference between social activism, which is obviously you spreading the word through media and friends and family and having conversations, and the financial activism, I guess you could say, of letting companies know that if they want investment, they need to be looking out, getting on the board. So it's kind of like coming at it from two ends, I sort of feel.
Yes, personally, that was a real issue for me, and I think that's gradually taking up, cottoning on. I think the majority of people have no idea where their money's invested, but as people, as that message gets through, then people stop to think, well, gee, or I haven't got much money, but then they've got this huge lump in superannuation that needs attention. And It's wonderful also because younger people are now focusing on that lump of money where otherwise they would think, oh, super, who cares, that's something for old age, that's for my future self to worry about. But now it's promoting them to actually take an interest, which is wonderful because as an advisor, you can make such a huge difference in someone's life when they've got the time to fulfill that, rather than seeing them at 55 going, shit, I'm going to retire in 5 years. I need to do something. But you give them 30 years and, wow, what a difference you can make.
Yeah, that's a really interesting way of looking at it too. I think super funds have for many years trying to be working out how to engage their members. And this is, as you said, a brilliant way of engaging members who have a longer term and obviously can do something about it. Now, I also wanted to touch on the concept. You mentioned this in the first episode around the financial logic. The financial returns of ESG funds now are not just the fund that never used to return as high, and people used to chase the money first. And you think that pendulum swung?
I do. Just from that notion of, okay, what's going to be the future industry, and what are industries that are slowly dying or not going to be around or are going to have to radically change to cope with what our futures will be. So you're not speculating on the next big thing, but you're investing in companies that are going to be sustainable, not only in an environmental sense, but also in a financial sense, in that they're tracking on major themes that are going to be much more prevalent in our lives going forward. So that makes sense from a sustainable, both financial and environmentally, I think.
Fantastic.
And that's showing and there's a myriad amount of research showing that you no longer have to sacrifice returns. It can be a little bit more expensive in terms of the amount of the amount of active management in an ESG type of fund is typically going to be more, so they can be more expensive initially on each individual fund, but not much. It's getting better all the time.
Thank you, Paul, for being part of this episode around is there actually a need? Let's move on now to the next episode, and we'll see you then.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome back to this episode, Alexandra Brown.
Thank you so much, Fraser, for having me.
Now, thank you for being here. Now, of course, we're talking about the hot topic of ESG and is it actually a thing and should it actually be a thing? So I'm sure you had plenty to say on this topic.
I sure do. I absolutely think it's a thing. So, why ESG should be a part of financial advice? Why is it needed? I think that this answer's it's definitely got many facets. If it's okay with you, though, the first one I'd like to discuss is that global need about, and why we should have this, because this also happens to be a big why for why I do this myself. So it's really important to me as well. This is my why for helping financial advisors get into this space, my why for helping them understand ESG, and also to confidently provide ethical investment advice. And it all started probably a couple of years ago. I was reading some research on the Sustainable Development Goals. And if you're not really familiar with the SDGs, basically it's just 17 global goals that most countries in the world have agreed to try and meet by 2030. And these Sustainable Development Goals around things like climate action and education for all and reducing poverty and life on land and water and things like that. So it's about these environmental and social challenges that we need to meet as a globe, as a population, as a planet. So anyway, I don't know what the most recent figures are, but back in 2019, it was estimated that we need about $7.5 trillion a year to meet these goals by 2030. And we were about $2.5 trillion a year short. Okay, so that was a huge financing gap. And those figures, as I said, were back in 2019. So we're not going to meet these goals and targets by 2030. And I was reading this report and it had this really great diagram on it of the investment chain. So showing how money flows from people to the Sustainable Development Goals. And if, as you probably have seen it, the SDGs are depicted as like this circular rainbow. So this rainbow ring was on the right and the image of the people was on the left. And in the diagram, between the SDGs and the people, it had all like the institutional investors and governments and corporations and foundations and what have you. And basically it had arrows directing money from where the people were to the institutional investors and then to the Sustainable Development Goals. And this was how we were going to hopefully meet these targets, by mobilizing capital towards sustainability. But there was no mention of financial advisors. And, normally you would see them in the middle. Even if it says intermediaries or something, you would see something that mentions something between the people and the institutional investors. So, in my mind, a lot of people's money is going through financial advisors before it even reaches these institutions. So I really felt like financial advisors were such an integral link in this investment chain and in getting money from the people to the SDGs. So, my point is, why is ESG a thing? Because globally, we need it. We just need it.
Amazing. Yeah, I love that. And I love a good infographic too, by the way. We should try and source that and make that available in the show notes. So, or even just redesign it and put a financial, put a financial advisor in there and put somebody like yourself that teaches financial advisors in there. Just get that conversation out there, because it really does tell. A picture tells 1,000 words, and a good infographic like that can just sort of explain it all. And a great reason why you're doing what you're doing. By the way, thank you. Let's talk about the consumer behaviours and what's driving. And I guess let's start. We sort of talked about this last episode around consumer stats around consumer wants, needs, and hopes and dreams and aspirations around this. That drives this conversation with advisors. Let's talk about how consumers are a big part of this.
Yeah, absolutely. I honestly think that's, the other biggest driver is client and consumer demand for ethical investments and advice. And, the advice that takes into account ESG considerations. I do have a couple of stats for those that love their statistics like myself. So these two figures, they're taken from a 2020 consumer survey from RIA. And the first one states that 86% of Australians believe that it's important that their financial advisor asks them about their interests and values in relation to their investments. So 86% believe that their advisor should ask them. And the other one is that 88%, so nearly 9 in 10 of Australians surveyed, believe it's important that their financial advisor provides responsible and ethical options. So those figures are just huge.
Isn't that incredible? And in one of the episodes, we're going to talk about supply and demand, but this is the supply and demand equation, as we mentioned in the previous episode. You mentioned in the previous episode, just the sheer short odds or the lack of people that are actually specialising in the space or putting it out there or getting the message out there that they specialise in the space compared to the demand.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's incredible. Now, tell us what's sort of driving that consumer behaviour? Is it are we looking at activism, passions, like human emotion, people really just taking more notice of the world around them and the human rights? Is it media? And how has the financial logic of financial returns sort of come into this? Where are we at that space?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel that it's all of the above, that what you've been saying, because we have so much information at our fingertips, that this sharing of information has really enabled us to see the difference between, what our money can do and how we can invest better. And consumers are obviously part of that and seeing all that.
So have you seen, where do you think we are in the area of the financial returns from ethical investing stacking up with, there is a thing in the past and maybe deep in our thinking that ethical investment funds never would return as good of returns as, say those with that didn't take that into account?
Honestly, the performance myths have been busted so many times that I can't even believe that this is still a conversation. But, people do want to see facts and figures and what have you. And go to the RIA website, go to the latest benchmark report. It's got a great table there showing, responsible funds versus mainstream funds over 1, 3, 5, and I think 10-year periods. And you'll see that the outperformance there of responsible and funds across pretty much all time periods. But I also think that it is a huge barrier as far as for advisors and even clients, understanding that you can achieve outperformance by investing more ethically. And I do actually have some more statistics because, I just love a good statistic.
Let's do it.
Yeah. But so I was reading the Schroders Global Investor Study, which is from 2020, and they surveyed over 23,000 people across the globe. Okay, so it's a huge global study. And it showed that people around the world are increasingly becoming engaged with sustainable investing. They're increasingly willing to learn about the topic and become conscious investors. So it shows that, people across the globe, they're just not only attracted to these sustainable investing approaches, but they also believe that this approach can lead to favorable investment outcomes, which I thought was great. So 42% expressed that the prospect of higher returns was their reason for favoring sustainable investments. So 42%, it doesn't sound, like a huge amount, it's under 50%, but it is evidence to show that there are still many people do believe that you can get higher returns with sustainable investing. But of course, there are still a lot of people that think that you have to sacrifice higher returns when choosing to invest sustainably. Yeah. And I think I would just quickly contrast that with the study in Australia, which was conducted by RIA as well. It showed that 67% of Australians believe ethical or responsible banks perform better in the long term, and 62% of Australians believe ethical or responsible super funds perform better in the long term. And these results, which was from 2019, were up 29% from 2017. So nearly a 30% jump in 2 years in how Australians are viewing the outperformance, I guess, of ethical investing.
Yeah, wonderful. As you said, the performance myths have been busted, and there's a couple of great resources there too for advisors to be able to go and find that information. I do actually, personally, I think the concept of past performance versus future performance. We're talking about skating to where the puck is going to be. So it's not necessarily about past, but you're absolutely right. Hey, Alexandra, thank you so much for being on this episode. I really appreciate it. I look forward to catching up with you again when we start chatting about the 50 Shades of Green.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Fraser.
James Harwood, welcome back to this episode where we're talking about the actual need for ESG.
Thanks, Fraser. Good to be back.
Fantastic to have you back on. Now, tell us. Let's get straight into it. Tell us about the actual need. Why is there a need for ESG funds in the first place?
Yeah, I think it's worth stepping back, a couple of years and, back to the bushfires. I think that was really what we saw as a defining moment for this trend in ESG, or the huge flows of money that we've seen going into ESG strategies. And, the bushfires really was a wake-up call for a lot of Australians to understand that climate change is an issue. We're seeing the same thing. I think in Greece this year we've had some major fires over there, and California has had some issues for a number of years now. So I think that's really woke up a lot of people that they want the world to be a good place for their kids, their grandkids. And I think this is why ESG and particularly the environmental side of ESG has been such a kind of key requirement for investors. So in terms of why is it a thing, I think that was really the defining moment in terms of resetting what investors want from their investment products. So that's meant focusing on carbon exposure and really how companies are addressing their impact on the environment through their activities. So I think that's a key thin that I would highlight.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? This is the world we all live in, and our kids are going to grow up in. So it's something that we want to leave in a decent place anyway. So you sort of mentioned in the last episode that the governance has been around a long time, but this is really bringing the E out of the ESG into it, isn't it? The environmental, how do we want this world to live? Has this been a client, a consumer client push then, or is it coming from both ends?
I think it's coming from both sides. There's also the regulatory side as well. So the super funds have requirements from APRA now to consider climate change in the way they invest. Where some of the other industry bodies like the UN Principles of Responsible Investing, that's been around for over a decade. But the focus on climate change has really ramped up, and as part of our submissions now, we need to really look at the sensitivity analysis of different climate scenarios and how that will affect our investments. So it's evolving all the time. As I say, that's one of the great things about ESG that makes it so interesting. But it does remain hugely challenging as well. I read Bill Gates' book. I don't know whether anybody on the line has, but that's certainly worth a read, just in terms of how we need to, what we need to change to get to net zero by 2050. There's an enormous amount of change that will be needed to get there, and really then that comes back to your question around governance. We need to influence companies to change, because there's probably not a immediate financial benefit from doing so. I think that there will be a cost to invest in new technologies. Great to see companies like Fortescue making those investments and really having that longer term forward perspective on the world 10 years down the line. But definitely some of the industry bodies like investors groups on climate change, that can really influence behaviors as well. So governance is an important part of the solution.
Yeah, it seems to me that there's a lot involved for a company to make this decision to do that. And obviously, the early adopters are going to be able to. We'll probably have to go through a little bit of pain, but also get the, get the coverage for it, for doing so, and being named as the ones that are leading the pathway. With consumer behaviour, there's obviously with social media and ways that social. The word can get around activism and passion and emotion can get pushed out pretty quickly and then spread pretty quickly.
Yeah. Look, I'm probably the wrong demographic in terms of the younger generation and what they're how they use different social media platforms to influence behaviour. But I think maybe things like the Rio Tinto Juukan Gorge controversy last year. Around the Aboriginal heritage site, that there's if companies get involved in those kinds of activities, they're going to be blasted by not just investors but by individual and consumers as well. And that had a massive impact in that a lot of the board ended up losing their jobs due to the governance from that as well. So I think there's a lot of aspects to this. Without a doubt, I think younger investors are looking for typically more growthy types of assets as well. That they naturally tend to investments, say like lithium batteries and that part of the investment landscape. But it's definitely something that I think we see from all angles basically.
Yep, and now I guess in the past I used to feel like there was the those people who are passionate and active within those companies, and then on the other end of the spectrum there was people who were just chasing financial returns or the logic behind getting better returns. Are we seeing these two ends of the spectrum coming sort of closer together?
Yeah, look, I think that's a great question. And, when I started really focusing on ESG maybe 6-7 years ago, I think back then there was a belief that, you went down the ESG route, at the expense of returns. I think that whole aspect has turned on its head now, that investors expect, ESG investing to match or deliver better returns than, non-ESG based investments. I think that, clearly the jury's still out, and a lot of this, a lot of the quantitative work that looks at these strategies and how they perform through time, it's obviously looking backwards. But I think if we look forwards, increasingly now that the expectation is for companies to do the right thing. I think I mentioned in the the previous session that we're starting to see companies demerge. So Woolworths demerged their alcohol business to allow investors to access Woolworths, the supermarkets, as a security. Not having the alcohol business has allowed other investors to do that, and clearly the flow of money into those stocks is going to be beneficial as well. So I think the sin areas of the market are going to be harder and harder for more and more people to invest in, and that's why AGL is probably another example that's going through. AGL is our biggest emitter from all of its coal-fired power generation, but the company is looking to separate into a renewable focused company, and then the kind of legacy old coal-fired power generating business as well. So I think there is this natural trend to for companies to position their businesses for a sustainable future, and I think naturally that's where money will go. And you would expect, as a result, those parts of the market to do well, and non-ESG focused areas to increasingly struggle.
Yeah, I feel like consumers are making a bit more of a statement with their purchasing power, which is bringing the ESG fund or the companies that are focusing on showing how well they do in this space, especially with environmental and social issues, to then have more custom. I guess people are spending more money with those companies, and therefore that'll help with the returns for the investors. Yeah.
Look, and I think it really touches everything we do from a purchasing perspective. If you buy a chocolate bar, where does that cocoa come from? Has there been modern slavery involved in that? Has there been some deforestation? I think increasingly you're going to find all consumer products have more and more disclosure on where that supply is coming from. We've had some new regulation come into Australia this year on modern slavery. So we have a modern slavery statement, and it's an area that's quite complex in terms of supply chains, and also the fact that we're based in the Asia region. That's where the biggest area of modern slavery occurs in the world. So again, investors don't want exposure to that, clearly, but trying to get that information is not always easy. But I think you will start to see more and more information disclosed on consumer products to allow individuals, when they're making purchases, to have them aligned with their values, basically.
Yeah, fantastic. James, thanks for coming on this episode and talking about the actual need for ESG. We look forward to catching you in the next episode where we dive a bit deeper into the 50 Shades of Green.
Thanks, Fraser.